confirmation from President Ramaphosa that conversations are now underway with the United States, which has made some sort of about turn regarding its participation in the G20 Leaders Summit program. Bring into the discussion international relations expert Brooks Spector. Brooks, I'm not sure how much of the news you've seen. So the US, according to President Ramaphosa, now showing an interest in taking part in some fashion. We're not too clear how. What do you think would have brought about this apparent about turn?
Yeah, it's been fascinating. I heard most of your broadcast on this, and I've been getting intimations about it from other people through other channels. It's not obviously clear yet what form this participation is going to take. Months ago, I speculated that the Trump administration would be unable to stay away from this ultimately, because it was such a big microphone that reached so many people in so many different ways. And apparently in Washington, they have made a decision that in some way, shape, or form, they'll be represented in this meeting that starts on Saturday. One thing that's obvious is that there was a very large American contingent at the B20, the business conference that has just wrapped up. I think, I didn't see the final tally, but I think the American business contingent, mostly Americans representing their companies or working with American companies, was the...
Brooks, I think you've been muted either in my ear or something is going on with your device. Can you just check that for me?
I'm not muted.
Fantastic.
On my side.
You're back now. I don't know what happened, but please complete your thought.
It wasn't me. In any case, what I was saying was that, interestingly, during the B20 meeting, the business summit, perhaps the largest contingent besides South Africa was the American business contingent, which meant that many people, many organizations, many companies saw this as an opportunity rather than something to stay away from. In some way, shape, or form, maybe the Trump administration has just been distracted by other issues and didn't really focus on how useful such a meeting could be, even if it disagreed with the three main legs of the discussion point as outlined by South Africa's president for this event, with the realization, too, that they must ultimately take the gavel or the ceremonial mace or a handshake or whatever it is to host the meeting next year. There's been a lot of bluster from the Americans. We want to make the grouping smaller next year. Maybe South Africa couldn't be a party to it. But I think in ways that we don't all really know yet.
Let me ask you then, Brooks. Let me ask you, while they're trying we're trying to figure out what shape the participation by the US in the summit will take, do you think it would be too far of a move to expect the president himself to fly to the US, to South Africa, or even his vice president, J.D. Vance, who was initially muted as the person who would attend?
I'm going to go way out on a limb on this one and say I think it's probably a little too late for either of those two people to make the trip with a day's notice. But quite clearly, I mean, there is an embassy here, and there's the charge d'affaires, because the ambassador has not yet been credentialed. It's possible, for example, a senior State Department official might make the travel to send the president or vice president. There are so many security and communications arrangements that have to take place. With 1 day's notice, that may be a bridge too far.
And what then do you make of, in light of this relationship, the tension between Washington and Pretoria? President Cyril Ramaphosa being quite frank today, saying that ultimately there will be a declaration by the leaders at the end of the summit that South Africa will not be bullied. Did you expect him to speak as strongly on a matter related to the United States? And how do you think that is likely to affect the tempo in the relationship going forward?
Well, personally speaking, I'm rather glad he said that there will be a joint declaration, a final communique, because that signals, if nothing else, that the other participants are coming to an agreement on what that declaration or communique would include. Now, if the US has someone in the meeting and they disagree with the contents, then that becomes problematic as well. So, there's so many loose ends all of a sudden, it's really quite extraordinary.
Is part of what we're seeing tonight perhaps proving true the words from South Africa's International Relations Minister, Ronald Lamola, at one of the G20 platforms in the week, where he said ultimately that the world will move forward with or without the United States? Is that the realization perhaps that Washington is having at the 11th hour of the summit?
Yes, I think I think there's a point to that these international forums, although they don't decide things, in other words, even if there is a joint declaration that everybody signs off on, there's no enforcement mechanism. You can't make a country behave in a way that's consistent with the communique. There is a sense that that becomes a global view, and to the extent that that's true, then the Americans presumably feel that it is better, as I was trying to say before we were worried about communication, better to be inside the tent than on the outside looking in curiously and apprehensively. If for no other reason, that you're much better off inside the discussion rather than just sort of poking your nose in at it. I mean, diplomacy is, after all, the art of trying to work with people rather than being bellicose and refusing to do so.
And very briefly, Brooks, shortly after SABC News had broken the news that there had been this change of heart, shall we say, out of Washington, regarding the G20, I believe this was the White House Deputy Press Secretary, Anna Kelly, who basically then said it was fake news. How likely is it that she was misinformed?
I'm not so sure she was misinformed as much as she was not yet fully informed. In other words, the information hadn't caught to her yet, if for no other reason that it was an ongoing exchange.
Brooks Spector, good to talk to you. International relations expert. Always good to have your time on the SABC, speaking to us about the upcoming G20 Summit. To remind you, of course, SABC is the official broadcast partner of the gathering.